Hey, my name is John Ayers, and I'm going to be doing T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday. I've affectionately nicknamed him the therapist to the age of modernity. So we're going to be covering a biography. There's not a lot to him. Going to be spending a little bit of time in the World War I context because that is important. He's got some body of the works. We'll talk about those, mostly focusing on Ash Wednesday and the relevancy of why we actually want to study T.S. Eliot. So the biography is, congratulations, he was born September 26th, 1866, St. Louis, Missouri. So he's an American, at least when he starts. He grew up in a very well-off, educated family. They valued education and manners. He was an intellectual. Proves it by getting a full pilgrimage. He went to Harvard and to Paris and to Oxford, like you do when you really care about education, especially classic education. In England, he moved to England in 1914. He never came back. While he was over there, he married Vivian Haywood and became a full British citizen in 1927. Same year, by the way, that he actually joined the Anglican Church. He never came back to America. Did I mention that? He was a commercial lender for Lloyd's Bank until he found his real heart's job, where he became a publishing house agent with Faber and Faber. This is really when he gets to start making his mark in poetry, which is what he wanted, being a classic lyricist. And in 1949, he received a Nobel Prize in literature. He died January 4th, 1965 in London. He was a very boring man, and he quietly changed the world. So those are the two important things you need to know about him. See, he's no Mark Twain. He didn't travel the rivers. He didn't mock politicians. His battlefield was the human heart in an age of doubt. He didn't do his work with a lot of show and pizzazz. He was a quiet man. Okay, and he lived at a time where the world needed a therapist. They didn't need a comedian to kind of bring these things to him, and he did his role pretty well. So the post-World War I context. Some of this stuff is kind of hard for us to wrap our heads around, so I am going to give you some. I live in North Carolina, so I'm going to give you some geographical stuff. Okay, so World War I ends in 1918. The soldiers don't come home with a bunch of parades. They come home to trauma. 20 million people were killed and 20 million people were wounded. Now, again, we live in a world of, 7, 8, 9 billion, lots and lots and lots of people. It's not quite the same thing, but let me put some context into this thing to you. World War I really took place within a 400-mile stretch between Belgium and northern France. Now, what does this mean? Well, I live in western North Carolina. I am 410-ish miles to state capital of Raleigh, North Carolina. So put that in perspective. 20 million people and 20 million more wounded between the mountains of western North Carolina and its state capital. 1 out of every 15 people in France died within 4 years. Now, again, we're talking men, women, children, not just soldiers. Everybody is affected by this. And this is in everybody's backyard. We're not talking about having a war over there. This is a war taking place right in the middle of everything. The biggest thing that goes along with this is that the entire world believed that civilization had just become, frankly, too modern and too intellectual and too reasoned and too advanced to ever do something so barbaric. Wow, did we prove them wrong? Not just once, but twice. And we continue to prove it wrong. Like, this war isn't just about numbers. It's about the death of an idea. And that's really what this is so inclusive in history with. Okay? A man may die, nations may rise and fall, but an idea lives on, and ideas have endurance without death. But that's what happens in World War I, is that there was a death of an ideal. And that took a lot of people a lot of time to try to sort through. What does it mean for a culture's ideals to die? And this is why T.S. Eliot stepped into it. So his major works. The Love Song of J. Alfred Perfrick. I probably mispronounced that, like I've mispronounced a few other things in here, but that's okay. That was his first big claim to fame. This was kind of rightly, I think it got kind of published right after he got his job at the publishing house. What was interesting about this one it's Gen Z dating is what it is. It's a dramatic monologue featuring inner paralysis of self-doubt of a man afraid to act or love in a world that no longer feels meaningful. Like I said, no offense, Gen Zs, I get it. The Wasteland, that was probably the next one that really put him on the map. It's really an interesting poem, very fragmented, the way it talks about it, but it's hopeless. It really represents a man in a culture that have completely lost hope and completely given up, and they're stuck in the darkness. And that's kind of where the poem ends. Now we're going to talk about Ash Wednesday. So it kind of picks up the tones of Wasteland, starts off like that, but then it begins to change because it takes time for hope to change, or hopelessness to change into hope, really. That's what this one is really about. The next one, four quarters, it's the reconciliation one. This is the one where you've been in the dark, you've come out of the dark, and you're willing to accept that there's a bigger picture for these things. He also wrote a bunch of other plays and essays. Remember, he's a publicist. He's into these kind of things. He writes a lot, and that's kind of the big things that T.S. Eliot are known for. Okay, so let's talk about Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday has 6 sections to it. And the poem creates different images that supply the context for the stage of what he's in. So here are your sections. And here are the images. So there's the image of despair. There's an image of lady. Now, the third section is one that I'm qualifying, and I'm calling it the wilderness or the midbar. And we're going to talk about that when we get to it. Because the imagery is the desert, but it'll make a little bit more sense when I have to explain it. There's the stairs and the bones. The 5th section, it's a prayer, but he constantly talks about the word and the word and the word, kind of like John does in the beginning of his book. And the last thing is going to be the picture of the wind and the renewal of what goes on. And the prayer the poem follows this kind of basic layout. There is a spiritual despair, there is a sense of purification, and then finally there's surrender. And once you surrender, then comes hope, and then comes new life. Kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like a lot like coming to saving grace. And all of this good stuff happens, the surrender happens in section 5. We're going to cover a little bit more of that. So section 1, because I do not hope to turn again. He says this stuff over and over and over. There's a sense of despair, great despair that's going on in this one. Resignation, I hope to turn again, meaning he hasn't given up on earthly ambition, desire, and even on understanding God through intellect alone. There's a lamentation to this thing. There's a confession feel to the whole thing, that striving and reason have utterly failed him. He's between faith and disbelief. Like I said, it picks up really where the Wasteland kind of ends off. But you do kind of get a feeling that there's a sense of a turning point associated with it. And there's a repetition of because I do not hope. And I write in here that it echoes liturgical prayer. Personally, though, I get more of a sense from when I was reading it of Leviticus, because in Leviticus you constantly get this idea of do this in remembrance of me. I am the Lord your God. Do this in remembrance of me. I delivered you from Pharaoh. Do this in remembrance of me. For you were once widows and orphans. Do this in remembrance of me. Do this in remembrance of me. Do this in remembrance of me. He sees over and over and over. And the reason that God does this is that he's trying to make sure that we don't forget. Do this in remembrance of me. But there's a reason why. How do we connect these things? And that's really the feel that I always got when I was reading that first section, because I do not hope. The repetition, while it feels very prayerful, it's also in remembrance is really how it comes across to me. In section 2, there's the turning point. This is the lady imagery, intercession and grace. There are people. Okay, so we now encounter the lady. I really think that it's a wisdom figure. There are people who, because he comes from the Anglican background, who say that it's the Virgin Mary and stuff like that. In the scriptures, wisdom is the Holy Spirit, and wisdom is represented as a woman. If you don't know that, feel free to go check it out in the Bible. I highly recommend it. Wisdom is a figure that shows up in here, and it's a symbol of divine grace and compassion, spiritual meditation. The lady contrasts with the sterile woman of the wasteland. Again, you'd have to go back and read the wasteland to understand it. But there is while the same, how do I describe it? While the same sex of the person, of the imagery is still there, there is a different feel to the whole thing, because there is a purity and a reverence to it. It is true, he's not quite able to believe fully, but he does look at this character and this image as a signpost, as now that I can see this, maybe I can see the next thing. And the rhythm and the rhyme, it becomes very softer in section 2. Section 3, again, this is what I call the wilderness or the midbar. So why do I call it this? This is the desert section. Okay, all of the imagery in here is dry bones and deserts and rocks. This is the wilderness. Okay, now in Hebrew, the word midbar is the word wilderness, and it literally translates as the place of speaking. God speaks to us in the wilderness, and this is very important. Everybody, if you don't know this thing, in the wilderness of your life is where you hear God the clearest. And that's what this section is all about. It's the space between life and death, between silence and revelation. Dust and rocks and dryness echo both in Scripture, the temptation of Christ, and in the Exodus. This is also very reminiscent of the wasteland, as I said. But here it's very different, because there's a feeling that these things are sanctified, that there's a reason for it, that it's not utter hopelessness. The soul begins to hear in the wilderness. This is God's holy place. Whether it's in our lives or whether it's in poetry, whenever we can find the wilderness, that's where we hear God. Section 4, the bones and the stairs. There's an ascent through death and its disciplines. Now again, he's a classic lyricist. So this section is built around a winding stair. This is all very Dante, if you read Dante's Inferno and stuff like that. There's a spiritual act of ascent that requires humility and repetition. One of the interesting things about this section, again, being a classicist, is that in order to go up, first you have to go down, right? In order to turn left, first you have to go right. Everything is always backwards, but everything is backwards in the economy of God. He who is humble is raised up. The greatest among you is the lowest servant. That kind of feel to it. So that's what gets picked up a lot in this. The bones of the dust now become part of the process of resurrection, redeemed from fire by fire, right? There's a repentance to it. Each step upward means that he's dying to something old. And again, the rhythm in this thing, there's a lot of rhythm. The rhythm mimics a very slow and very prayerful climb. But here's the change. Section 5, the prayer of the transformed heart, serenity and union through the prayer. Okay, so faith in Exodus 17. All right, in Exodus 17, what you get is you get the first picture of the word faith. Okay, now the problem is when you go look for it, you're not going to find it because English is not Hebrew. Where you're going to find it in Exodus 17 is it says, and Moses' hands were steadied. The word steady is the word faith in Hebrew. Very important. The picture that's created in the Bible about what faith is it's Moses in the evening. So in the beginning of the day, there's a battle going on. Joshua has to take the troops down, and Moses is standing up on top of a mountain watching his people die. And God tells him that as long as he has a staff up in the air, he will be victorious. The people will be victorious. But in the morning, when Moses is doing it by himself, his hands are weak and they begin to fall. Now, it's only after Aaron and Hur come beside him, one on the left, one on the right, they pile rocks up underneath him so he has a firm foundation to sit, and he sits. And then they proceed to help him hold his hands. That's when he's steady. That's the picture of faith that God gives us in the Bible. We are not to do it alone. We're not Moses in the morning. We are to sit on the rock. That's who he is. And we are to surround ourselves with people, and then we have faith. And that's what Eliot gives us in this thing. Eliot, he says, teach us to sit still. Faith is a position of surrender. That's where faith begins. One of the things that he writes in this is, teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still. That's paradox language. Teach us to care and not to care. This is a posture of surrender. It's not apathy, right? It's trust. He's asking God, hold the tension for him. Teach me how to be still without becoming indifferent. How do I care about the world around me, but not be overwhelmed in the process of caring? That's a very important and very tricky thing to do for everybody. Section 6. This is the restoration and hope. The theme, new creation, life through death. The final section opens outward again, where we start hearing things, right? He brings the images of the wind and the sea and nature reborn. The poem ends not in a final arrival, this is important, but in an acceptance and stillness, the peace which surpasses all understanding. That's how the poem ends. The soul has passed from chaos into the wilderness, into the Word, Jesus, back into life again. The imagery suggests resurrection, redeemed in the time, redeeming the dream, and now we're going to talk about the relevancy. So, is T.S. Eliot even relevant today? Not really. Sorry, but not sorry. Eliot, he doesn't really connect with most modern readers. For fun, I study Hebrew on the side, and I love it because it's a picture language. I get T.S. Eliot. He writes like a classic guy. He writes in pictures. This poem is super dense with allusions, classical references, theological undertones. Guys, this is not 30-second pop nonsense that you're going to find on TikTok. You're not going to find like, here are the 3 things you need to know about moving forward in your life. He's not like that, okay? This guy wrote for a world for educated readers, where you've read classic works. That's not us, okay? It just isn't. And yet at the same token, he is very relevant because he wrote about a cultural disillusionment, and he wrote out of a wasteland that was coming out after World War I. And this mirrors the existential burnout of our postmodern age. The details are the same. The details have changed, but the ache is still the same. What is the point of life when we have lost a reason for living? That is a big question, and that is a still relevant question today. As I do this video, a few days ago, there was an election just held in New York City, a very prominent one. We have Donald Trump as a president. There's a lot of stuff that's going on, and a lot. It feels like the world has become more angry with one another. With the opinions have become more distant from one another. We're living in an age that's kind of tearing itself apart from the inside out because we are still struggling with the same question. What is life when we have lost its meaning? So T.S. Eliot, he's still kind of here. His relevancy really is about the diagnostic that he does. He does foresee a world where there's a spiritually starved, fragmented culture. Gosh, it sounds a lot like where we're at today. He did trace a way that shows that art and ritual and moral imagination collapse when faith collapses. If you no longer have faith in America or the American ideals, what happens? He lived it. He modeled the long climb back toward meaning through humility and tradition and prayer. And one of the questions, rhetorical questions I asked myself when I was doing this was, are we forever going to be fools building houses in the sand and storing our treasures for the fire? Yeah, probably so, because history and God says that we are absolutely going to be like that. So I'm going to leave it with this one. Even if most readers don't actually read T.S. Eliot, they live in a world that he predicted, and his visions still set the intellectual weather. So yes, he is still relevant today in the age of AI. Boom! A little bit of foreshadowing, kids. It's going to happen again. Eliot and the masses versus the intellectual elite. Again, look, he is not a charismatic guy. I mean, he's just not. And he didn't want to be, and he didn't care if we thought he was. He wrote to woke up the consciousness of the educated West. And so in his day, that meant he was appealing to a very small circle of thinkers and movers and shakers who shaped culture. Eliot believed that if truth could reclaim that class, they could reclaim the rest of society. I called that trickle-down elitism. If you're a Gen Xer, you should laugh now. But that's what he believed, man. Last question is, would Eliot call himself an American or would he call himself English? Yeah, so he was English. Legally, he was English. Emotionally, he was English. He was English. Granted, he was born in St. Louis, right? Don't forget that. He was educated in America, right? Don't forget that. And in France, and in England. But he left, and he never came back. He married a British woman. He became a British citizen. He was in the Church of England. He often said he felt more at home in England's religious and cultural tradition than the pragmatic optimism of America, right? So why do we need to study him in American literature? Well, let's get to that. That's my favorite quote of him. He says about himself, I am an Anglo-Catholic in religion, a classicist in literature, and a royalist in politics. None of these phrases fit the American temperament, and it's true. So in an academic sense, he's rightly studied through the lens of English literature, though American literature surveys include him because of his birthplace and, this is important, the influence on the modernism ideas that he has. And you can parallel him along with Frost and Pound and Stevens. And that is why we're going to study him in American literature. So that's all, folks. Thank you very much. I'll be here all week. Make sure you tip your waiters. Have a great day.